Wormholes, particle physics, extra dimensions. Are the wonders of so-called reality really what they appear to be? Or do we exist in an elaborate hologram? Is our universe the result of random activity or the result of intelligent design? If a creator was involved, can we discover him through our perception of divine order? This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
The first rule about multiverse is you don't talk about multiverse. Well, here to talk about the multiverse is myself and my lovely, beautiful wife, Christina Peck.
Hello.
Christina, how are you doing?
Doing great. I'm ready to talk about the multiverse.
I'm ready to talk about the multiverse, too, and finally break that first rule.
Stupid rule.
Yeah, I am your host, Josh Peck, and this is Into the Multiverse. Now, today we're actually talking about a little more serious of a topic, which is science at odds with theology. This is something that we who look into science, we've come across.
Yep, absolutely. This is kind of what we brought up in the first episode. A lot of Christians are afraid of science because they feel like it's a man-made thing, when really God created the laws of science and physics and everything. So
exactly.
There's no reason to be afraid of it.
Exactly. And, I say that true science is the study of God's creation in all its forms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, there are those people out there that take science, like what God has created for good and for knowledge, people use for evil. It's just something that happens. They do that with everything, playing cards, any kind of game.
Right.
They can use it for evil, anything they want.
Yeah,
Yep.
even playing cards have had some occult background.
Yeah, gambling and
there's
stuff.
that too, and so anything could be used. But when we talk about true science, the actual science that we talk about here, it's coming at it from a biblical perspective, but also realizing that we have to have some humility because we don't know everything.
No,
and a lot of this
not.
is speculative.
A lot of it is.
But that's the fun of it.
Absolutely. And we take the Bible verses and, to try to back it up, and with our own interpretation, like, it could be talking about something completely different.
Yep. Well, what's interesting is Matthew Fontaine Murray actually took the Psalms of the Bible literally, and it was actually Psalm 8:8, which says, "The fowl of the air and the fish of the sea, and whatsoever passeth through the paths of the sea." He was an oceanographer. This was well before underwater currents were discovered. He was actually the one that discovered underwater currents by taking Psalm 8:8 literally, where it talks about the paths in the paths of the sea. He wondered, what are those paths of the sea? So he went out and studied it, and he discovered underwater currents by taking
That is amazing.
So a legitimate science, a legitimate scientific discovery, taking the Bible
Literally.
seriously.
Discovering the science of it. That's very awesome. Makes you wonder, the things that we're discovering now in our universe are above in space, even the gravitational waves and things like that. What other currents are there if we just go looking?
Exactly. And I think part of what frightens some Christians, and I understand because I used to be like this too, is this idea that we have to accept everything that we're being told from scientists if we're to accept science.
Right.
And it really, exactly, it really goes into a difference between observation and interpretation, which we touched on a little in the first episode.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we're going to talk about it more in depth here. But basically, when it comes to science and really anything in life, there's an observation of what's happening, and that's just whatever is actually happening in reality. And then there's the interpretation, how we interpret it, what it means to us, and how we explain that to other people. I can talk about how meaningful a nice sunny day is to me because they're nice and I like them, and they remind me of, being a child or, whatever happy times in my past. But really, the observation is just, there's not as many clouds out. The sun, has more access to the earth. It's there's no when we actually just look at the observation, there's no real emotion.
Right.
Or I don't want to say meaning because there's meaning in everything,
right,
but there's no real interpretive emotional connection to it.
Right. Yeah. Just looking at it is different from experiencing it.
Yeah.
I get it. If you're just inside the building, you're like, oh, it looks nice outside. That's it. That's it. That's all it means to you. But
Yeah.
when you're outside, you're able to do more, experience it, be in it. You know, and
Yeah,
Yep.
experience plays a big part in it too.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and so a lot of scientists, when they explain something that they've observed or the results of an experiment, they'll put their own interpretation on it, their own spin. They won't. Sometimes they'll just lay out the facts, and that's it, and that's great because then that leaves us open to interpret it however we like, you know, and
Yep.
we prefer to do so from a biblical worldview.
Absolutely.
But sometimes, many times, scientists will put their own interpretation on what this discovery means and call the whole thing science. And it's science. It's like part science, part opinion.
Right. Yep.
For example, one physicist that I looked into when I was researching for my books, which I'll talk about a little later. He was talking about quantum field theory, which is something that we're definitely going to have to do an entire episode on because it's
that's a lot.
mind-blowing and phenomenal,
Oh, yeah.
and it's awesome.
Not enough time in the day, really.
No, definitely not. But he was talking about quantum field theory, which basically just the basic of the basics, and it's okay if this doesn't make sense now because we will do an episode on it later. But basically every particle, every fundamental particle arises from a quantum field. So the actual elementary existence or the foundational existence are fields, and it's the fields that produce the particles. And that's okay if that doesn't make sense yet. It will in a different episode. But he said that because of quantum field theory, it proves that there's no afterlife because there's no quantum field to take the information anywhere.
Right.
That's an interpretation.
That's an opinion.
You know, yeah,
Yep.
that exactly. That's all it is. He's free to have that opinion. I don't
Absolutely.
personally agree with it, but I love his work in quantum field theory.
Absolutely.
But I just don't agree with that interpretation at all. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to throw quantum field theory out altogether. We can keep the science because there's a lot of good science and a lot of good experiments backing it up. We can keep the science and then reinterpret it with our own biblical interpretations, which
Exactly.
is going to be more accurate anyway.
Absolutely.
Because
Yep.
exactly.
Because it's God's word and it was written and it's truth.
Exactly. And if we're being honest, we as Christians, we do that too. In our
absolutely.
in interpreting Bible verses, we have the observation that a verse exists. It's there. We can read it. The interpretation is different.
Right. Different words have different meanings. And, even going back to the original Hebrew and Greek, Aramaic, they can mean several different things.
Yeah.
So, and it's finding the right one. And still, our interpretation of what it is still on us, our opinion.
Exactly, and could be flawed, or there's a lot.
We're human.
We're human.
We're going to be flawed, and none of this is perfect.
You can take one verse and give it to 5 different people and get 5 different interpretations.
And like a game of telephone, you tell one person one thing, and by the time it gets to the end,
Yep.
it's something completely different.
We do the best with what we can, and I think if we come at it with a humble approach, with humility and full knowledge that we are flawed, we don't know everything.
Right.
We're it's easier to state things as more of an opinion than a fact when it comes to some of these things.
Right, yeah.
Which is I think a good thing
And
to
we
do.
did talk about that a little bit, like in the first episode, the science fact versus hypothesis. Getting the facts instead of what they want to call a theory.
Yeah.
Is just a hypothetical guess.
Yeah.
To them, because they didn't go through the control group. They don't know for a fact that there was a Big Bang. It was
No one was there to observe
Nobody was
it.
there to observe it. How do you put that in a science lab and have a control group?
The closest thing they have right now is the LHC at CERN, which they say recreates conditions of the Big Bang, but even that is still kind of speculative. And we'll if we have time, we'll get a little bit into CERN in this episode because it does have to do with what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Also, keep following this show because if you follow this show, there will come a time where you will understand how the LHC works. I know that's kind of a bold statement, but I promise it's true. The basics of this stuff really isn't as complicated as a lot of scientists and physicists out there try to make it seem. It's really more about learning a new language.
Yeah,
they speak a different language than
exactly.
us.
And the mathematics is a new language in itself, but it looks scary, but it's not.
And some people have asked, is science in itself a type of religion? Sometimes it can be, but I think true science, again, is just the study of
God's creation.
But I think that there are times where it can be a tool of a sort of like a religion.
Oh yeah, people have used it for strange things, and they'll take even. Briefly touched on geometry. And they'll take certain symbols in geometry and use it for the occult.
Yeah, and Aleister Crowley is famous for doing things like that.
Yeah, like the triangle, and coming up with the different meanings for that. It's a triangle, but it can be used for evil.
How they interpret it. And actually, Henry Slade was a so-called psychic.
Oh, yeah.
Basically a fraud, but he was a so-called psychic that back in 18 or maybe 19 something, 100 years ago or so.
Yeah, give or take a few.
Yeah, he actually tricked a whole bunch of people and even some physicists, and that's why this story got so popular, and it's still talked about today in physics circles, that he claimed that he was able to manipulate the fourth dimension, and that's how he was able to do some of we would call them magic tricks basically today.
Yeah.
But he was using these magic tricks to scam people out of money and stuff. And he would hold seances and do all these things. And he actually got in some trouble for it and had to go on trial. But there was a physicist named Zollner and a few others that actually came to his aid and set up this big, massive experiment to see if he could actually manipulate the fourth dimension.
For the sake of science. For
the sake of science. And the interpretations of if he was actually able to do it or not are still up in the air.
Right, it was never
I'd
really...
say probably not. I think Zollner published all of his findings in a book, but I think he probably had a lot at stake because he's coming to this guy's defense, so of course he's going to want. But it's still up in the air, but that's one example of how things like that we talk about have been used for nefarious purposes. There's even examples of people using higher dimensions, or the idea of higher dimensions, for occultish.
Oh, absolutely. Astral travel, things like that, stepping into extra dimensions in your spiritual body.
Yeah.
And very new age.
Yeah, and
but it's been around forever.
Something that I've talked about a lot in different interviews and shows that I've been on is that I have a background, unfortunately, in New Age. It was a big mistake, and I'm past it now, obviously. I've rededicated my life to Christ. But years and years and years ago, I had a lot of questions that went unanswered, and I went to the New Age to try to find those answers. But when you look into New Age theology, it's filled with a lot of physics stuff. They reinterpret physics for their own religion. Yeah. So it's not that extra dimensions and quantum physics is inherently New Age.
No, and it's not that it's evil. It can be used.
It can be interpreted as that.
Yeah.
We have a lot more to talk about, but before I do, I want to take a break because Nita Horn has written a fantastic book, No Fences. I want to give you some information on that and a writing contest that Skywatch TV is putting out. So more when we come back.
To celebrate the release of Nita Horn's inspiring new book, No Fences, Skywatch TV would like you to tell your story, because after all, even if you don't think so, you actually have a story.
Send in your story, and we are going to choose the 10 best, and they'll be published for Christmas release in an anthology of those stories, along with the book that you buy that is actually only $19.95. Am I right on that?
That's correct.
For free. Tom Horn, crazy guy, he's throwing in a journal which on its own, most of these retail for $20 on their own. So this journal is to help you start writing your story. When you buy the book, not only are you going to be enrolled in this and you can send in your story, but you'll get a plastic pony, you'll get a journal of your own, and the proceeds from the book are going to help fund the studio we're building for Skywatch Women. And Nita Horn is going to be one of our panel members.
The 10 authors who are selected for the anthology, published by Defender Publishing in time for Christmas, will also receive a $500 cash prize.
That'll go a long way at Christmas time, won't it?
Yes, it will. Even if your story is not one of those selected for the anthology, if you've taken the time to write your story, you've left a legacy for your children and for your grandchildren.
Amen to that.
For complete instructions and details on this opportunity, please log on to skywatchtv.com/nofences.
All right, and we're back talking about theology and science and how the two sometimes clash, why they clash, and it really all has to do with interpretations.
Yep,
it's
absolutely.
not, you know, I've believed for a long time now, since I really started studying this stuff, that true science and true religion, they're both truth, they're both God's truth, they should go hand in hand.
Absolutely. You don't have to pull that number that people do, separation of church and state and God and science deal. You don't have to do that.
We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But because there are others out there who are not Christian, say New Agers or Gnostics or people like that, they'll take some of these things that we can look at quantum physics and find biblical interpretations all over. I mean, it's like God's fingerprints are all over it,
yes.
as well it should be. We're talking about God's creation. But unfortunately, Gnostics and New Agers and a lot of different religions will do the same thing for their own religion. They'll take quantum physics especially, because that's just the time that we're living in, where all these new discoveries are being made, and they'll twist them to their own end. So a lot of times, an idea, and we're going to have to do, this is another episode, we're going to have to do a whole episode on this, if we can alter reality just by observing it. That's a whole thing.
Dear,
But because of the double slit experiment, which we'll talk about in a future episode, it really will take a whole episode to get into this. But because of that, and because of a different interpretation of it, there's this whole idea that basically we're our own gods.
Oh, yeah?
And we create our own reality around us. But as Derek Gilbert likes to say, if a bus is coming at you, you can't wish it away.
No.
You'll still get hit by the bus.
You've got to get out of the way in order to miss that.
Yeah, and I don't think people are creating that reality around them.
No. They want to be higher than a better, what was it, ascension.
Yeah, that's another big thing. Yeah, that's another big thing. And actually, even some, not all, and I don't even think most, but some physicists have taken more New Age approach in their interpretations of actual scientific experiments, like at CERN, and that's a whole.
Oh yeah.
We couldn't even cover CERN in one episode if we tried. It would be
like a
series.
whole season.
Yeah, but there's a lot of quantum technologies coming out now that utilize weird things that happen on a quantum level, like quantum entanglement, things that aren't really fully understood. But quantum entanglement, which is, it's basically, you have two particles and they're able to send information to one another at speeds faster than light. It's absolutely instantaneous. It's not supposed to be possible, because according to Einstein, nothing can go faster than the speed of light, because you run into all sorts of paradoxes and problems and basically time travel, stuff like that, infinite mass, lots of problems. But somehow, entangled particles, if you have two photons that are entangled, they're able to do it, and they've even tested this scientifically and have proven it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's fascinating how they communicate.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely fascinating, and it really does humble us to show maybe we don't know everything.
We sure don't.
But there's a lot of technologies coming out now that are based on things like quantum entanglement. There's artificial intelligence, quantum computers. That's a big one.
Yep.
The idea of transmitting information at instantaneous speeds it's an attractive idea.
Yeah, exactly. We did the episode on Sci Friday, the Li-Fi.
Yep. Li-Fi.
How like the 200 gigabytes a second?
Yeah.
Just crazy technology.
Yeah. And that's just using a light binary system.
Right.
That's not even using quantum entanglement. And even that is that much faster.
Yeah, and it's like we see that 200 megabytes a second, and we're like, oh my gosh, that is instant to us.
Yeah.
But this entanglement of the particles, that's even more instant.
Yeah.
Imagine the information being transferred.
Yeah, there are certain theories about quantum entanglement that it might be possible based on utilizing higher dimensions. Maybe that's how it can happen instantaneously. And that might be possible. But if that is possible, and they start building, let's say, quantum computers, and in a decade or two, we're living in a world where everything's run by some kind of quantum-based computer.
Aren't they using crystals for that?
There was something like the quasi.
Because it's supposed to be the purest form to send information and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine if we're living in a world where they're doing that. Where, if quantum entanglement does actually use higher dimensions to work, where is all this information going?
Right. Oh my gosh. And if, at CERN, I know we have to talk about this in another episode, but
we can touch on it.
Trying to communicate with higher dimensions.
Oh, the graviton communicate.
Yes,
and that sounds completely crazy and completely out there.
Goodness.
Like, what are these two talking about? They read some nuts blog, conspiracy blog.
This is actual.
This is actual. A physicist, Brian Greene, actually talked about this in a documentary, and this was years ago, that they're planning on taking gravitons once they can manipulate them and developing a binary system with them by altering the spin of each graviton to create a binary and sending it into higher dimensions, because gravitons they can naturally go into higher dimensions.
Yeah.
Gravity can leak into higher dimensions, so the theory goes. So they want to set this up and then set a detector up to see if anything responds.
So crazy.
So that leads people like me and others out there to wonder, is that the key to the abyss? Is that what is going to invite the angel to open the the abyss?
Crazy to think about, because it's so possible. Like,
yeah.
It's like they're kind of messing with it, like the paranormal investigators. They're trying to get a response from a spirit, an entity of some sort, and if something interacts with that field, it goes off.
Yeah.
So, and CERN is kind of doing the same thing, trying to get a reaction from a higher dimension.
Yeah, as far as we know, they haven't done any experiment like that yet, but I'm sure there are things that we don't know that we're not being told, but I don't want to go too much into that area. But it's at least in the works. I mean, it's been discussed for years now, so they're at least talking about it, which is crazy to think about. But that's why it's so important to have biblical interpretations of these things. I have no problem with the idea of quantum entanglement. I believe that it's possible.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether to use it to further technological advancement is a gray area.
Right.
I could see how it could be good or it could be really, really, really bad.
Oh, yeah.
But going as far as to try to send messages to higher dimensions, I would say that's necromancy.
I was going to say that's borderline the necromancy, and that's definitely something that we are told not to do in the Bible. We're not to communicate with the dead. We're not to communicate with spirits, familiar spirits, things like that.
Yeah, we don't pray to angels and things like that.
And even like the quantum computing with the crystals, how they're doing that, it kind of reminds me of the crystal skull.
Oh, right.
The Mayan skulls. Not that it would be that intentionally used for evil, like the crystal skulls, like the psychic energy of crystals and things like that. But in a way, it could be used. It could be issued in at some point, Yeah.
And since the people that are in control, the people of power in this whole thing, clearly aren't looking at any of this from a biblical perspective.
Right.
That leads us to wonder, what is their true motivation? What are they really doing? But that really shows how important it is to have good biblical interpretations of these things. So it's not that the science itself is evil or wrong.
It's just how they're using it.
It's how they're using it. It's their interpretations that cause these type of motivations.
Yeah, and they want to make it sound like it's being used for good. Like higher, faster technology, faster, this and that. But what it ultimately leads up to.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, we live in a crazy world. Well, I cannot believe I am already saying this, but we are we're about out of time. Now, next week we're going to be talking about we're going to give an overview of particle physics. We're going to talk about the building blocks that God has used to create everything, us. It's going to be a mind-blowing episode, and I can't wait to do it.
Exciting.
Where can people find the show?
Oh, you can go once again to skywatchtv.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/skywatchtv_official.
Fantastic. And don't forget to like us on Facebook, Into the Multiverse. Find us on Facebook, like us, leave a comment, and if you would, if you have a question that you want to ask us or an idea for a show, you can email me at jpeck, at skywatchtv.com. Well, I cannot believe that this has gone by as fast as it has.
It always does.
It always does.
We have to bring up these things in future episodes and like do entire episodes.
Yeah, we do and we will. Well, thank you all again for joining us in the multiverse. And until next time, take care and God bless.
From the time she was little, Nita dreamed of horses. Every childhood fantasy rode on the back of a heroic white steed, coming to save the day.
I don't know how long I've had this love in my heart for horses. It's just always been there. And when we were little girls, my sister and I would play all day long. I was always the white horse and she was always the little pink pig.
Let's pretend Lightning and Rosie can fly.
But everything changed in a heartbeat. On December 9th, 1971, a tragic car accident claimed the life of my dad and my best friend and my little sister. And I wondered after that if there was anything left to believe in.
Move aside, let the ambulance through. Please move aside.
As a child of 13, I felt like I had lost practically everything. And I wondered, is this it? I mean, where do I go from here? I could not have imagined back then how God could use horses, of all things, to restore my faith and vision for the future.
Starting April 19th, get your copy of Nita Horn's inspirational new book, No Fences, and learn for the first time her amazing story of loss, survival, determination, and healing. How the vision and love God gave her for these beautiful and majestic animals eventually led to the 150-acre Whispering Ponies Ranch, a general retreat facility, as well as a premier training location that specializes in using and gifting therapeutic animals to benefit the herding. Other care facilities, schools, and ministries across the nation.
When God puts something in your heart, it's there for a lifetime.